Hi, I'm going to show you how you can add an exception to a day after rule for your schedule, because you might have situations where a typical day after rule might be something like if a provider is on call, they cannot be on backup call the same day. Or another popular example is you can't be on call 2 days in a row. So that's where you would establish a day after rule to help you from doing that. But you might run into exceptions where you could say, well, if a provider is on backup, they can take call the next day, but only for certain providers. Other providers, they would not be able to take call the next day from being backup. And so it's not there's an exception to it. It doesn't apply to everybody. And so we call those add-on rules. So let's begin with this MD on call. So when you select the service on the left, your info box gives you details about that service. And the bottom right side has an option that says day after rules. If you are using our resident fellow scheduling platform, on your call schedule, you won't see an option for day after rules. So if you want to establish day after rules or an add-on, you'll have to go to your window menu and select, there will be an option here that says day after rules for you. But in our regular attending health professional platform, it's listed right here on the info box. When you click on it, it opens up the rule box and you have options for on and off rules. You get to set up these rules per service. So right now we have the MD call selected. So this would be the rules for MD call service. These columns represent day of assignment. So the green check is referring to the current service selected. So how you would read this is if you are on MD call, you cannot be on call backup the same day. We have an X placed there. Let's go down to call backup. If you're on call backup, you cannot be on MD call the same day. So you can see how those kind of cover bases so you can make sure you don't put the same provider on. So to show you an example of that, when I click into an assignment cell, my info box shows me my list of providers that are available. If I select Dr. Eway and then come down here to call backup on the same day, you can see Dr. Eway's name disappears as available, so I don't schedule him to cover both services the same day. Now, let's talk about where you might have the exception where only certain providers can take call the next day from being backup. So here I am on my call backup. I'm going to establish a rule that if you're on call backup, you cannot be on MD call the next day, or basically when you're post-call from backup. So the second column is referring to the next day of the assignment. I've just placed an X there, so you cannot be on the next day. And I could also reverse that for your MD on call. If you're on call, maybe you can't be on call 2 days in a row, but you can certainly do backup the next day from call. Okay. Now to do the add-on, I'm going to go back to my backup and I'm going to hold the control key on my keyboard and then select the X to the rule I want to apply the exception to. So in this case, I'm going to do the next day for call. And I get the rule writer opening up to what we call an add-on rule, and you'll see that listed here in gray. This bottom drop-down is what you'll use to set up the rule. It's your conditions for your rule. In this example, we're going to choose staff. So we get a list of our names in our schedule. So as I mentioned, our rule is that if you're on call backup, you cannot do MD call the next day except for 2 of our providers. We're going to say that except for Dr. Eway and Rover. So this will only apply to them and not to anybody else. Everybody else can, but these 2 providers cannot take call and backup. So you'll notice as soon as I select those names, I get this yellow highlight around the red X. Let me know I have an add-on rule tied to that day after rule. Let's just take a look and see how this works. So if I come down here and let me move my list here, and I put Dr. Pluto as backup, okay? Now, remember, Dr. Pluto can take call the next day. So if I click up to the next day, you'll see that Dr. Pluto does come up in my available list. Now, one of the examples is let's go down here. Let's put Dr. Iway on backup. So now when I go up to call the next day, you can see Dr. Iway is not available to take call. Now, I can certainly go over to the backup the next day, and Iway is available to do backup the next day because I didn't say that that couldn't happen in my rule. But if I go up to call, it filters him out. So that is how you can establish an add-on rule. I'll do another one just so you can see an example of that. You might have an example where if you're on call, maybe an on rule, so we'll do an on rule, that if you're on call, you have to do backup the next day, but this only applies to, say, Dr. Pluto. So I'm going to switch to on and click on the next day for call backup, and I get a check mark saying, if you're on MD call, you have to be on call backup the next day. Now, to initially make sure that this rule is working right, let's give it a test. So I'm going to put Dr. Pluto on MD call, and notice that it autofilled Dr. Pluto onto backup the next day. So we know that worked well. Now, let's put in the exception. Hold down my control key, click on the green check. I get my add-on rule, and I'm going to say that this only applies to Dr. Pluto, but not anyone else. Okay, so going back here, if I put Dr. Rover on, it does not autofill Dr. Rover down to backup call the next day. Let's try Dr. Pluto. Dr. Pluto does. So you can see how that exception is now working for the on rule. If you have further questions on how to set up these add-on rules for your day after on or off rules, please let us know. We're happy to help.